Hello and welcome to the channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about photographing holiday lights, some of the things that I do, so a few tips. The two biggest challenges that I run into oftentimes is having things in the background, other light displays that interfere with the one that I'm trying to take a photo of, causes a lot of distractions and sometimes even a little bit of confusion to the viewer. And then also, as odd as it sounds, taking photos at night, blowing out the highlights, which is actually a very easy thing to do. So I'm going to talk through a couple of examples and show how I dealt with them, and then finish up with a slideshow at the end of some of my favorite images from my visit up north. Arriving at Bentleyville, like any of these light displays, it's very easy to be overwhelmed at first, and in fact most of the time when I first get to a place like this, I'm not really quite sure where to start. But we notice right away that there are a lot of distractions. You can see other light displays through light displays that are close up, and how are you going to go about trying to get something that is relatively clean, especially since the way the camera will interpret the image, things are going to look like they're right on top of each other even though they're further back, because our camera just doesn't capture that third dimension. One of the things that I will typically try to do is when I first get to a place like this, I'll look for something that will give me kind of that larger picture, but provide some things like leading lines in that. And as we approach this center area, it's kind of a gathering area for people once they arrive. We can see the tree in the background, and we can see a lot of other sort of interesting things along the side. And so looking at that, thinking, well, can I take that left side and use that as a leading line to then bring the viewer into basically the tree and the sign for Bentleyville in this case. So that's exactly the approach that I used here, and this is the photo that I ended up coming up with. What's interesting here is that this photo still has quite a bit of clutter, but it doesn't necessarily hurt the image. And the reason is that it also has a strong set of anchors. First off, we have the tree, which is very prominent in the background. And being that it's the tallest thing, it's also very sharp. It immediately grabs the attention of the viewer. Second is the sign. So the Bentleyville sign, whenever we have words in a photo, that is going to attract the viewer, because one of the things that we just naturally try to do is read something that has words on it inside of a photo. And then third, if we look along that left-hand side, we do see some repeating elements along with the fence line. And we've got the penguins and those little balls. So that also works towards bringing the viewer back there. As I wandered around, I found this old truck, which probably shouldn't be much of a surprise to anybody that knows me pretty well. Challenge here, again, was that there's just a lot of clutter in the background, and the light was pretty challenging. Trying to work with both the shadows and the bright lights, and even though it turned out we had the place mostly to ourselves, I brought a monopod instead of a tripod because I didn't want to be blocking the way for people trying to walk down the walkways and that they had there. So I wanted to make sure I had at least a decent shutter speed. In this case, it was 1/20th of a second. And I had to then go to an ISO of 640. That actually was what I stayed with most of the night in order to be able to get a fast enough shutter speed and just basically get the kinds of settings I was looking for. Now, if we look at this photo, one of the things we'll see is we have both some things that are blocked out, although it looks like when I hover over it, not too many things turn blue when I do that, but there's a few little things in there. But then if we look at the snowflakes on the tree and then a few other spots, we can see there are some things that are blown out. Although realistically, had I not mentioned that, probably wouldn't have really noticed that. But something to definitely work on. Unfortunately, though, I also had some really dark shadows. And if we look around the truck itself, the truck really needs to be the most prominent thing in the photo. So need to do quite a bit in order to bring that up and kind of work with the light itself. So when we look at the edited version, we can see that, first thing I did, I brought the exposure up 1.5 stops. And you might think, well, why didn't you just shoot it that much brighter earlier? Well, then I would have lost a lot more of the highlights, and those would not have been recoverable at all. So bringing that up later, that information is still in the file. So then I can bring things down. But what that did do is it did give me things like the star on the top of the tree. If we go back and look at the original, you can see the star is really dark. But by bringing that up, now that star is there and you can see it. So it does make for a little better image in terms of just details with the trees that are on the flatbed. And again, helps to make that truck that much more prominent in the frame. I did go set up a few masks. If we look at the various masks, one of which was the sky. And with the sky, I went and actually darkened down the sky back that same 1.5 stops. Otherwise, there were just too many things that started to come in to the background. I also took the cab of the truck and I made some adjustments there as well. And so if we look at that, you can see I did actually bring down the exposure just a touch along with the highlights, but I did bring up the shadows quite a bit. That gave me a lot more definition underneath. So things like the tires, the undercarriage, the bottom of the flatbed over here really started to come in and just really make the truck just be that much more prominent. And then I had the issue because of the other changes that the tree got way too bright. And so just bringing that down, just knocking the exposure down a little bit and adding a little bit to the blacks helped out to make the tree look just a little bit better. And you could see now, if you look in those snowflakes, you could see that there is actually detail. So if we look at the before and after, we can see quite a big difference between the two. Now there's still a few little things that I wanted to clean up, so I brought those into Photoshop, and this ended up being the final image for this. And so now you can see that the truck is definitely identifiable as the main subject. It's helped out by the trees that are on the flatbed, even those two little trees in the foreground. And the rest of the stuff really is now just giving that sense of place. So even though there's a lot of it and there is a lot of clutter in the background, it's really not that much of a problem because the subject itself is pretty well identified. There were really so many interesting different things to see and photograph, and I really liked the flight school that they had set up. The problem was there was just a lot of stuff in the background, and initially I shot this a little brighter, and the problem was, as you can see, all the background lights started to really become a big distraction. And in fact, those snowmen on the bottom really were not doing anything for this photo at all. So I decided to shoot it a little bit darker. That would remove some of the things that are happening in the background. And now they're still there, so definitely needed to do some cleanup, but the cleanup was going to be a lot easier. I also needed to do something with just that little bit of a wheel or ball coming in from the lower right-hand side. So I went through and did some removing in the background. I decided to leave the lights that were showing up through the chalkboard because I thought that just added kind of an interesting little effect. Since they weren't too obnoxious, it almost just looked like maybe it was just some previous drawings in that on the whiteboard or chalkboard. And I thought it just added just a little bit of additional interest. So this was the final result of that photo. Another thing that you can do is you can go with a really shallow depth of field. And with some of these LED displays that they had, it was pretty easy because they were really flat. And in this case, if you're familiar with the Charlie in the Box from the Land of Misfit Toys or Island of Misfit Toys, I forget whether it's Island or Land, they had a whole bunch of these, and I thought going with a really shallow depth of field and bringing the exposure down a little bit, it almost adds a little bit of motion or element of motion with the way that the lights are coming out behind him going off to the other side. Fortunately, there was nothing to the right that was behind it. It was actually a little bit of a hill or mound or something that was there that was blocking some of the other things. So I thought this worked out pretty nice. So I took a bunch of other photos, and here is a slideshow of my favorite photos from my night, actually 2 nights that I wandered around. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like. If you would like to be notified about future videos, go ahead and subscribe and hit that little bell, and you'll get notified when new videos are available. Thanks. Bye.